I'm not known for being a huge fan of the Wii's controller. I feel there are one too many unambitious developers working on traditional genres and forcing them onto the Wiimote. Instead of creating an original idea around a unique controller, they often deliver mediocre versions of genres that control better on other platforms. The best Wii games are the games designed from the ground up, with the Wiimote as its inspiration. Traditional genres can be great on the Wii too, but usually when they keep to simple gestures. The games that require the player to look around and aim by pointing the Wiimote are often my least favorite. So when I decided to try a rail shooter on the Wii, I was expecting a similar disappointment. I was wrong. This is the exception to the rule, as I have discovered this genre is actually better with a Wiimote and nunchuk setup. But unfortunately, Treasure's Sin and Punishment 2 is a tease. It presents us with a great new way to control a fading genre, but ultimately frustrates the player with manic gameplay fueled by visual inconsistencies. While inherently limited in terms of player control, rail shooters allow the game's director to present fast-paced cinematic scenarios often impossible in games with full player agency. When at their best, rail shooters are visually exciting roller coaster rides. But what separates a great game in this genre from a mediocre one is the player's ability to understand, follow, and interact effectively with the action on screen. This is where Sin and Punishment 2 falters. The game is a chaotic mess. If not for the extremely forgiving checkpoint system, a spammable dodge button, and a stupidly generous health bar, this game would be unplayable. But the problem with the visual language in Sin and Punishment 2 is not so much the fault of the genre, but instead Treasure's manic style of game design. They love variety and spectacle. As if it was their signature, Treasure games are easily identifiable by the frequency of their boss fights. Why? Because every 5 minutes you are fighting a new one. Even regular enemy encounters are completely different from 1 minute to the next. And while it is certainly reasonable to want variety in games, Treasure took it way too far this time. Sin and Punishment 2 suffers from an inability to coherently communicate to the player what the hell he or she is seeing, doing, or interacting with. While most games might have the player readjust to new situations or enemy types, they don't do it every 5 minutes. Pretty much every game we play strives to have a somewhat coherent visual language that allows the player to adapt to new encounters. If a dude has a gun and is shooting at you, you shoot back. If he throws a grenade at you, you run out of its range. In Sin and Punishment 2, the bad dudes are never the same, and the shit they throw is always different. Some attacks you can dodge, some you cannot. Some projectiles you can knock back, some you cannot. Some objects you can navigate through, some you cannot. Some enemies can be attacked by your sword, some cannot. Some attacks stay in the foreground, while some attacks go through the foreground. Again, the problem is that Sin and Punishment 2 changes up these rules every few minutes. The result is a lack of satisfaction often obtained when learning a game's systems. You can try to adapt to each new situation, but it is not worth the effort when something different is only a few minutes away. So the best course of action is to mash on the dodge button until the overpowered bomb attack is ready to be used again. Release the bomb, dodge some more, and repeat. It's silly just how repetitive the gameplay actually is, considering how different everything on screen looks from moment to moment. These problems are especially frustrating considering how well the game controls. I tried playing the original Sin and Punishment prior to starting the new sequel, but ran into the problem I've always had with action rail shooters. The pat your head and rub your belly like method of controlling your aim fully independent of your on-screen character has always been a challenge for me. Surprisingly, something as silly as separating the controller into two parts actually solved this problem. The Wiimote and Nunchuk controller is, without question, the best way of playing this very niche genre. Because character movement, including jumping and dodging, is relegated to the Nunchuk, and all forms of attacking are on the Wiimote. It allows players to easily separate in their minds the defensive and offensive gameplay. Since character movement has zero influence on how you shoot, this setup feels very intuitive. I can't help but imagine how much better of a game Sin and Punishment 2 would have been had Treasuries off the clusterfuck lever and cleaned up some of the visuals. With their history of making fantastic shoot-'em-ups, Treasure should understand more than most the satisfaction of navigating through a well-choreographed bullet pattern. But there were one too many fuzzy lasers and blurry bullets on screen at any given time to give the player the confidence to do anything other than spam the dodge button. Let me be clear here. With the exception of a couple of boss fights and one or two stretched-out checkpoints, I did not find the 6 or so hours I spent with this game particularly challenging. After a couple of deaths fighting the final boss, I turned off the game from sheer exhaustion. This game's idea of challenge is simply filling the screen with more confusing projectiles and forcing the player to spam dodge faster and harder. My point is, if I had a more difficult time getting through the game, I might have questioned my spam dodge strategy. But it was by far the most effective option in nearly all situations. When I defeated a boss, it almost felt random, or if by accident. There was rarely a satisfying sense of accomplishment when I overcame an obstacle in the game. Sin and Punishment 2 does have its moments of awe-inducing craziness, but anything memorable is fleeting when combined with the tedious dodging and inconsistent rules. I love a good fruit medley, but if it's littered with small little turds, it will be hard remembering it being anything other than a shitty bowl of fruit.